Okay, everybody, welcome to part one of this discussion, the twisted philosophy of Sabbatai Zevi. Um, in saying that Zevi's philosophy is twisted, I'm not implying that it's anything new. Some people, even within Judaism, thought that what he was introducing was something new. Just like Theodore Herzl, some have thought, and I once thought, that what Theodore Herzl was introducing was something new, right? The concept of Zionism. For the longest time, I thought that Zionism was, a new movement that only just came about in the late 19th century within Judaism. Um, and this is how Christians, a good many Christians that aren't, you know, blatant Zionists, hardcore Zionists, this is how they get around the whole thing. They'll say, well, that's just something new that came about. But, originally the Jews were God's chosen people and they were devoid of that kind of corruption and didn't have that agenda in place of world domination, blah, blah, blah. No, 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 no. What Theodore did, Mr. Herzl, was bring true Judaism into the fore, right? And get people rallied behind, get Jews particularly rallied behind, and Christian Zionists rallied behind this, uh, you know, agenda for the state of Israel being created and on, thinking it was within the Zionist Christian movement, that it was a movement of God, and to get a great many Jews thinking it was a movement of God. The timing of that was pertinent because they were getting ready to set up the state of Israel. It was hoped that they could do it with the First World War. They only got the groundwork laid for it. They had to stage another one, not only to set up the state of Israel, but to finish the job of destroying Germany. The First World War wasn't enough. But notice the timing. The Zionist movement came about just prior to that. Oh, they have everything all planned in advance. But anyway, just like with Herzl, he wasn't introducing anything new. Zionism has been around, maybe not under that name, but the concept, the ideology, the agenda has been around for as long as Judaism has been around, because Zionism is Judaism. And so it is with Mr. Sabbatai Zevi. He wasn't introducing anything new. He was bringing true Judaism out in the open for all to see. His philosophy was nothing new, any more than Herzl's. His philosophy really is true Judaism. But anyway, um, there had been so many splits in Judaism. There still are, but even those splits, a lot of them have uh, either an outright reverential view of Zevi or a backdoor reverential view. Zevi has strongly influenced modern Judaism across the board, as we're going to see. And so what it really represented was a revival of what true Judaism was, and always has been. Anyway, so yeah, let's take a look at Mr. Zevi here. Jewish philosophy has always been screwed up to begin with, right? But when we consider the philosophy of Mr. Zevi, it gets crazier still, or the craziness of it got revived. But again, yeah, what he introduced, the concept of salvation through sin, wasn't so much a sinking of Jewish philosophy to a new low, but a codifying of what Jewish philosophy had always and ever been about. Um, but that was known mostly to the elites. Judaism is itself, to a large extent, a secret society, right? Just like Christianity is. It's led and directed at the top by individuals in the know, to lead the masses that follow it in directions they otherwise never would go in, right? And the full fruition of that for Christianity is, in fact, Christian Zionism. But they know when they create religions like that and secret societies, they're always going to have a percentage, sometimes a large percentage, of individuals that aren't going to follow the main game plan. Um, and so they just focus on the ones that are totally duped to, to do their bidding. And so it is, with Christianity, so it is with Islam. They know that there's going to be a movement within it that's going to even backfire and become a big problem for them. But they always had backup plans. They created Islam to, divide, Christianity to use it as a means of war against Christianity without their fingerprints being on the gun, right? The masses they knew wouldn't see Judaism's hand in that, and vice versa. They knew that there would be times that they'd have to sick Christians on Muslims, that it would counter backfire in the other direction. And so that's what they've done through the centuries. One minute they're using Christians against Muslims, then Muslims against Christians, on and on and on. And so, anyway, but Sabbatianism or Sabbataiism, Zeviism, or whatever you want to call it, was a movement within Judaism to bring back Jews to what Judaism was supposed to be. There had been many splits. There were a lot of Jews opposed to the Kabbalah, to the Zohar, and the third faction wanted them on board with that. That's what the third faction is all about, right? Occultism. And so Zevi was bringing back this concept, popularizing it, claiming to be a Mashiach or the Mashiach. A lot of Jews still think he was the Messiah. Anyway, so he was a bridge between the Torah and the Kabbalah for Jews, right? He was trying to revive the Kabbalah within the Torah-only movement. And even though there's still a lot of Torah-only Jews that reject the Kabbalah, it did bridge the gap for a lot of Jews. It did get a lot of Torah-following Jews, to mesh them together and think it's all one. It was, again, it's just an attempt to unite Jews under, quote, real Judaism. What Judaism had always been from the start, just pure evil. But making it look like, this is what Yahweh is all about. And of course, that is what Yahweh is about. But in the thinking of some Torah Jews to this day, they reject the idea of evil and Yahweh being associated. Just like within Christianity, right? You can clearly see Yahweh's evil. He's as evil as you can be, right? He's every bit as much the devil himself as the devil character. They're one and the same, really. But for a lot of Christians, no, they don't see it that way. And you can't convince them, even though their own book clearly shows everything he says, everything he does in that book is pure evil. But no, when they're thinking, they have a good heart, a lot of Christians, right? And so they just interpret the Bible that way. That's the way I interpreted it, right? I would always have a ready-made excuse, and I wasn't doing it to be deceptive. I just, the evil side of Yahweh, I wasn't willing to go there. I wasn't able to go there. And so I would just, constantly point to other passages that, do portray him as good and just, even though it's completely contradictory to how he's portrayed on, 99% of the rest of the time in that book. I would just focus on those few passages. There are Jews who do the same thing. And again, if you doubt it, well, you're not paying attention, because there are movements within Judaism that are opposed genuinely to the Israeli government. They're opposed to what's being done to the Palestinians. And just like within Christianity, they do want to see a world of peace. They don't want to see all this fighting. They're against Jewish supremacism. And yet they, just like, some sincere Christians, they interpret the Torah in such a way, the whole Old Testament, that, they defend Yahweh as being the source of all that's good. They don't see Yahweh as a source of evil, right? They do the same thing that the Christian world does, that rejects Zionism. And even though still they're following that evil playbook and their philosophy is still twisted because of it, just like within the non-Zionist Christian world, they still, have sincerity. They really do want peace. They don't want the Palestinians killed. They reject it. They call it evil. So they're an example of some of the Jews that the Sabbatai Zevi movement was not able to bring on board. They know there's always going to be some that aren't going to follow along. But overall, what Zevi accomplished did do what they wanted, right? It did accomplish what Zevi himself wanted. A lot of Jews were brought on board where they had always wanted them to accept, evil as good because, the philosophy that he embraced had convinced them of such, which is, again, what the elite Jews had always followed, whether they were third faction, first faction, second faction, right? The priestly line, the kingly line, or the secret societies. All of them indulged in evil, right? Because they were all into power and ruling the world. But the only thing they differed on was how to do it. So anyway, that's kind of a long diatribe, but I hope I'm helping to put this in perspective, what's been going on. Zevi came along just, he couldn't come out and say, hey, all my fellow Jews out there, Judaism has always been evil, and I want you all to embrace evil. He couldn't put it in those words. But that was his message. He just did it in a more roundabout way. But he actually came out in order to get Jews to embrace evil. He came out and said that sin was the way to righteousness. He knew a lot of Jews were into this righteousness thing, right? Moses really was the one that first introduced that, this idea of a moral code, just to fool, his own Chosenites, to get them behind him. So Zevi picked up and ran with that concept of righteousness, but now he's implying that in order to achieve righteousness, you have to sin. The more you sin, the closer you're going to get to where Yahweh wants you to be righteous. So dive into the depths of sin, and the more evil you get, ultimately it's going to bring you around to pure righteousness. That was his philosophy. And so, again, it's obviously a total deception, right? But this is how he was getting those factions within Judaism that believed in righteousness and holiness, to get them to accept evil as a means of achieving good, of bringing about ultimately good, right? And yet all the while he's sinking them into the depravity of fucking evil. That's Judaism for you guys. So Sabbatai Zevi wasn't introducing anything new. He was bringing to the fore what Judaism had always been, and hoping to fool some of those crazy Jews that actually believe in moral standards, to bring them around into pure Judaism, which is pure fucking evil. And so his influence was profound then, and it has remained profound among a great many Jews that otherwise would not have accepted this idea so easily, right? So, he was third faction all the way. Anyway, his philosophy, because it was new to a lot of Jews, right? They didn't know what true Judaism was all about. So the ones who rejected it thought that, well, they're just rejecting him, and they couldn't understand why so many other Jews were accepting it. They were appalled by it, right? This is a scandal. When in fact, all that was happening is they were coming face to face with what true Judaism had always been. His ideology was so scandalous that even several Jewish historians themselves have expressed shock over it, and thus over Zevi, and appalled that so many Jews, had been and still are falling for it. For example, Gershon Scholem stated that Zevi may very well have been psychotic. Yeah. Problem is, though, he didn't recognize, or maybe didn't want others to recognize, that that's what Judaism itself is. Judaism is psychotic. Joseph Castine said that Zevi was both a rabid homosexual and an out-of-control egoist. And so he's trying to make the point, why are so many Jews following this guy, looking up to him? Traditional Judaism, or so he thought anyway, is opposed to homosexuality, right? Here's a guy that was following, or at least wanted others to follow, the schizophrenic part of the book that condemns homosexuality as sinful, right? But yet, on the other side of the coin, as I have pointed out on this channel numerous times, the Bible endorses and embraces homosexuality. A great many movers and shakers in Judaism in the not-so-holy book were rabid homosexuals, right? David, for example, and Jonathan had a very cozy, loving relationship going on, kissy-kissy. Jesus, clearly, was a rabid homo. Well, he was bisexual, right? There's evidence that he had something going on with Mary Magdalene as well. But, he had his little flings with several of the disciples. The disciple whom Jesus loved. Of course, Christians would get all freaked out and call that blasphemy. But there it is. There it is. Right in your not-so-holy book. He's in the garden with one of the disciples who, when the crowd came to arrest him, he ran away, for he was naked. His one garment that he had wrapped around his waist had fallen and he was naked. Why would he even be there dressed like that, alone with Christ in the garden? It's very suspicious now, isn't it? We're told about this one disciple whom Jesus loved, that he reclined on his breast. Peter wouldn't even ask Christ a question. He asked this disciple whom Jesus loved to ask the question, because he knew that that disciple had a very special, close relationship, and he would more likely get an answer than Peter would, And why is it that, the book of John doesn't tell us, that's where it mentions this disciple whom Jesus loved. Why doesn't it tell us who this disciple was? Doesn't mention the name. It's very obscure. It just says the one he loved. It's just so bizarre, so fucking twisted. Anyway. So Castine said that Zevi was, both a rabid homosexual and an out-of-control egoist. Yet the Jews of his day largely considered him, Zevi, the Messiah. And he still has a sizable following to this day that believe he was, quote, the Messiah. So anyway, let's have a look at this individual and the impact that he's had. Born on August 1st of 1626 and having died on September 17th of 1676, Zevi was an Ottoman Jewish mystic and ordained rabbi from Smyrna in Turkey. Zevi was a descendant of the Spanish Jews who had been expelled in 1492, Sephardim. In other words, he lived at a time when there was a lot of shit going down. For example, Jews being allowed under Cromwell to step foot back in Britain, openly anyway, right? They had always still maintained an influence there and a presence there. They just weren't known as Jews. Their influence never ceased at all. But they weren't able to live there openly as Jews, practice Judaism, set up synagogues for, centuries on end, from 1290 to the mid-17th century. Anyway, active throughout the Ottoman Empire, Zevi claimed to be the long-awaited Jewish Messiah and had founded the Sabbatean movement. Upon arriving in Constantinople in February of 1666, the magic number, that's the year, don't forget, that Jews set off a great fire in London as a distraction while they were pulling all their shit, getting their foot back in the door, right? Not just that, they pulled a lot of other stuff. I'll get into more of that in detail down the line. Anyway, at this time, Zevi was imprisoned on the order of the Grand Vizier, Koprolutzadeh Fazil Ahmed Pasha. I love these long names. In September of that same year, after being moved from different prisons around the capital to the imperial court's seat in Adrianople, he was judged on accusations of fomenting sedition. A classic Messianic figure, right? Down through the ages, guys, almost without exception, Messianic figures were also rabble-rousers, right? Political subterfuge, insurrectionists. Jesus himself, the real character, was, of course, Judas Christus. But you can see from the pages of the Gospels, as I've pointed out many times over, especially in my Jesus Under the Microscope series, the Jesus character in the Gospels was an insurrectionist. There's no question about it. You can see that right from the pages of the Gospels in what he said and what he did. No doubt about it. And of course, the real life character that the Jesus character was invented around was, in fact, Judas Christus. Yes, an insurrectionist who was crucified by Pontius Pilate. And he was crucified because he was an insurrectionist. That's what crucifixion was for, crimes like that against the state. According to the Gospels, that's why Christ was crucified. Pilate had on his titulus the words, Jesus, King of the Jews, written on the thing, right? The titulus was to notify onlookers why the individual was being crucified. And so Pilate was letting people know he's being crucified because he's an insurrectionist claiming to be king instead of our appointed minion, Herod. Anyway, but check it out. Zevi was an insurrectionist. How classic is that? Zevi was given the choice of either facing death by some type of ordeal or of converting to Islam by the Grand Vizier representing Sultan Mahmud IV. So he chose the latter course, or at least pretended to, donning a turban from that time on. It created quite the scandal within Judaism. He did it just to save his ass, but he made it out like it was some divinely guided measure that he had taken. And so a lot of his followers likewise converted to fucking Islam, right? Holy shit, guys. It's unbelievable how easily people can be suckered in by a goddamn raging fucking loser and not only see the individual for the loser that he was, but sing his praises and think he's divinely sent and, follow him right over the edge of the fucking cliff if that's where he leads them. Holy Christ, man. Anyway, the heads of the Ottoman state then rewarded him with a generous pension for complying with their political and religious pressures, right? This is the same shit that went on across Europe with Jews when they claimed to convert to Christianity Oh, they were welcomed with open arms. They were allowed to still live in their midst, still engage in their classic Jewish shenanigans, but as long as they were Christians and showed up in church every week, that was fine. Wow, wow. Clearly, there were those who wouldn't do it, and they got expelled, or in some cases, um, if they were so dedicated to their Jewish religion, they'd go to their deaths. But most of them, that's not what happened. They either left the country or they went through the motions pretending to be converts. All of them pretended. Some weren't as good at it, and they were called Marranos. The ones that were good at faking it, they were called conversos. They were considered genuine converts. None of them were. Knock it off. Fucking stupid ass shit. Anyway, about 300 families who followed Zevi at the time also converted to Islam and became known as Don May. The Don May were the Jews that followed Zevi and converted to Islam. This was like Jews pretending, again, to be converting to Catholicism and succouring, the masses of Christians in that direction. Anyway, in time, recognizing that he wasn't a real Muslim, Zevi was later banished twice by the Ottomans, first to Constantinople, and when he was heard singing psalms with Jews, to a small town known today as Ulcimj in present-day Montenegro. Anyway, he later died in isolation, we're told, but yet still he has a huge following to this day. Collectively, yeah, it's a pretty large following. And yet, look what a loser he was. It's kind of like Mormons still following Joseph Smith, even though the guy died in a fucking barroom brawl. I mean, it's so freaking... And even though he was a rabid Freemason, right? Anyway. The Kabbalah had prophesied that the year 1648 would begin the Messianic era. At least that's what a lot of Jews believed. They always play these games, right? Christians do it too. They'll pull, or at least professing Christians, Schofield juxtaposed several verses together that had nothing to do with each other and did some magic backflips with numbers, and bang! He claimed that 1948 was prophesied as the year that Israel would be restored by God, And so the Christian world, lo and behold, a good deal of it got all enamored over this, the Zionist Christians, and thought that, and still think that the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948 was a divinely ordained prophetic occurrence. And so that's what followers of the Kabbalah were doing, the same thing, claiming that 1648 would begin the Messianic era. So that made Zevi look all the more inviting. So, Jews play these numbers games too, juxtaposing shit together that has nothing to do with each other. The Jewish community largely looks up to rabbis as divinely led, just like within Christianity, right? They look up to this leader, that leader, and think that God is leading them. They're basically as inspired as the Bible itself. And especially when they're quoting from the Bible, even though they're twisting it, they don't see it that way. The Bible proves that this guy is being led of God. He's got new insight that God has given him, Anyway, this was also the year of the great Khmelnytsky pogrom, 1648. Jews were getting their asses kicked. So, as you can see, the times were ripe for any huckster to come along and lay claim to the Messianic title. And that's why the Christ character or Judas Christus and others like him were able to gain a big following because of, stuff that was going on. They were claiming that the prophesied Messiah was supposed to come at this time. So Messianic fever was at a high pitch, and that's why the Messianic, the leaders of the insurrectionist movement were claiming to be the Messiah because they knew that they would be able to maximize how many people would rally behind them, right? And they weren't religious themselves. They knew the whole thing was a fucking scam, right? They were third factioners. But they also knew that claiming to be religious and quoting from the Torah, which they couldn't stand, would get a big following. And so that's what Judas Christus did, Judas of Gamala, and on it goes. And so that's what the Jesus Christ character was doing, professing to follow the Torah just to get people behind his insurrectionist movement. And so Messianic fever was at a high pitch too at this time. Jews were being allowed back into England. So it looks like, God was, shaking the heavens. Major events were taking place, major changes on behalf of Judaism were happening. So God was working miracles. So it was believed that, yes, this must be the time when the true Mashiach is going to emerge. So when Zevi came along, he was just taking advantage of this, just like the Christ character, right? Christ arranged it so he would ride into Jerusalem on the back of a donkey, because Zechariah said that when the Messiah came, he would be seen riding on a donkey into Jerusalem. Oh, yeah, that's real prophecy being fulfilled. That's not something that anybody could orchestrate to make it look like they were the fucking Messiah, right? Christians quote stuff like that to say that, of course he was the Messiah. Look, he rode into Jerusalem with a donkey. People fell for it then. Christians still fall for it today, when instead of saying, well, wait a minute, is that really a sign of, from God that he was the Messiah? All you got to do is find a fucking donkey and ride into Jerusalem. That's all he did. And so he was hoping that that was going to bring about such a massive conversion to his thinking that he was going to be able to pull off an insurrection and be crowned king. Didn't quite work out that way for him, though. They were hailing him at first, right? According to the Gospels, they were waving palm branches and singing Hosanna in the streets. But then later, when they saw that he got arrested, and he wasn't performing any divine miracles, they realized, wait a minute, this guy's a loser. He fooled us. Apparently, that wasn't a sign he was the Messiah when he rode in on a donkey, because Yahweh isn't intervening with his heavenly angels to overthrow these Romans that have arrested him. So now they're shouting, crucify him, right? Anyways, so his little plan backfired. So anyway, sure enough, because of these circumstances, many Jews unquestionably accepted Zevi's claim to this position. He was the main one stepping forward as the Messianic claimant. So in their thinking, it almost didn't matter what he said, right? The timing was right. Everything seemed to be pointing forward to it. They were told that 1648 was to be the beginning of the Messianic era, and now this guy's coming along. And, there were all kinds of rumors being spread that he worked miracles, blah, blah, all this horse shit. So they were convinced this must be the man. Therefore, everything he taught was of God, you see. So now if he's saying that sin is the way to righteousness, oh, okay, well, we got to sin. Exactly what real Judaism always had been, but they didn't realize that. He's just reviving true, pure, quote, third faction Judaism. Anyway, again, this is precisely how Christ or Judas Christus gained his following so effortlessly, and several other Messianic claimants of the day. And a lot of them cooperated with each other, behind the scenes anyway. They were they were claiming exclusively that they were the Messiah. But a lot of them, they weren't at rivalry with each other for the most part, right? Because they were all in support of the same thing, overtaking the Romans. Um, there was some confusion, though, because some groups of Jews were following this one, other groups were following that one. So this idea was, well, maybe God is sending multiple messiahs. Don't forget, there were actually two main messiahs that they were looking for. One was supposed to be the priestly messiah, and the other one, the kingly messiah, right? Ultimately, though, what did the Christ character in the Gospels do? He got rid of John the Baptist because he didn't want any rivalry or any competition, right? And he certainly didn't want to be answerable to John the Baptist, who was supposed to have preeminence over him as the priestly Messiah. So after he got him out of the picture, he was emerging now as the all-in-one priestly and kingly. But anyways, it wasn't just that, though, that was going on at this time, a priestly and a kingly. There were multiple messiahs that were claiming that position. So there's a lot of confusion. Jews were like, well, wait, there's supposed to only be two. There were times where there were half a dozen of them all at once. But it didn't matter. Each one of them had their share of followers, and they would conspire behind the scenes together. Okay, yeah, I'll have my group while you have your group come in at the same time. We'll attack this Roman garrison over here, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, back to our Zevi discussion. So at that time, there was also a high level of anticipation of, Jerusalem, of Israel being restored and Jerusalem becoming the capital not only of Judaism but of the world, right? That had always been the Jewish hope. Rabbis had always instilled their followers with this idea. And so it was thought that this guy might be the very one. He's going to restore the kingdom to Israel. That's what it was thought was going to happen with Jesus, right? Remember, after the alleged resurrection, the disciples now are gathered around in the book of Acts, chapter 1. They're gathered around Jesus now, and they're asking him, Lord, is the kingdom going to be restored to Israel now at this time? Notice, they didn't say, Lord, are you going to take us up to heaven now? No. That's not what they were looking forward to. They wanted the kingdom of Israel restored and rule the world, right? That was their number one question. And he answered, it's not for you to know the time or the seasons. He didn't know himself. But check it out, guys. That was what their question was to him. Their almost important question. Are you going to be crowned king now? You conquered death. You certainly should be able to conquer the Romans now. They wanted Israel set up as the head of the Jew world order. Anyway, so toward the end of 1648, Zevi carried out one single action that drew attention to him as the Messiah. Rising in the synagogue, he uttered the mystical full name of Yahweh, the Tetragrammaton, something that was forbidden unless you were actually the chosen one. So this convinced a lot of people that he must be, because no one dare utter the name of Yahweh. It was believed that, you could be zapped right there on the spot. You couldn't pronounce the full name, right? You could only refer to him as, the Holy One or whatever. Anyway, you couldn't even write it down. In fact, a lot of Jews to this day don't write the word God out. Did you ever see, Christians do this too, certain Christians. They won't write the word God. They'll write G-D. Cut the shit. As though God is actually a name to begin with. But they certainly won't write Yahweh out. It's YHWH or Yav, whatever the Hebrew letters. They won't write it out with any vowels. In fact, that was a tradition for so long. Nobody actually knows for sure what the actual vowels are anyway. It's just Yahweh, right? They don't know what the vowels are. And so that's where you get things like Jehovah or Yahweh. They're just guessing, but they really don't know. It's YHWH, the Tetragrammaton. But anyways, he pronounced it in whatever way he thought, probably Yahweh, right? And so this was forbidden. You weren't supposed to do that unless you were specially chosen and sent by God. So that really codified his following to support him with greater vigor than ever now. He must be the Messiah. You know, it's pretty stupid, right? But this is the thinking in Judaism. And it worked for a great many people anyway. And so, you know, that's all that was needed for him to do. Just like in Christ's day, that's all he needed to do is ride in on a donkey. And the jackasses fell for the donkey stunt. Anyway, at least initially. So once Zevi saw that his followers had now looked to him as the Messiah, he realized that he could basically tell them anything he wanted and they were going to believe it, just like Jesus had done, right? He went so far as to tell his disciples, "You are my friends if you do whatsoever I command you." Look what a manipulative little prick he was, right? But it worked. They did it because, well, he's the Messiah, and he just said, if we want to be his friends, we got to do whatever he says. That's literally what he said in the book of John. You are my friends if you do whatever I say. Oh, no, he wasn't a fucking mind control manipulator, was he? Give me a break, man. Like someone who supposedly was divinely sent by, quote, God, would even need to say that. It would be self-evident. He wouldn't have to manipulate them with a tactic like that, a mind control fucking cult leader tactic like that. He wouldn't have to say it. It would be a given. They would do what he said just because they believed he was sent from God, right? But no, he had to reinforce it to ensure that they would follow what he said by stating, that's a cult leader, folks. That's not someone divinely sent by God. I can't stress it enough. If he was supposedly divinely sent by an all-loving, compassionate deity, he wouldn't have to say something like that, would he now? The fact that he said that demonstrates what a fucking nutwagon cult leader he was. Anyways, so Zevi, realizing now that, yeah, it worked, just by saying the forbidden holy name of God, Yahweh or whatever, now he could tell them anything and they'd believe it. So he did. He started telling them all kinds of outlandish shit. For example, he told his followers that he could fly, but that he wouldn't be able to demonstrate this ability in public because it was something that no ordinary man was allowed by God to see. But I can do it, and you must accept it by faith. That's what the whole Bible's message is, right? It makes all kinds of outlandish fucking claims that are absolutely goddamn ridiculous. But you must believe it, because whatever is not of faith is sin, says the Bible. So you're going to be sinning against God unless you believe all the nonsensical bullshit in this book, like, Mr. Jonah shacked up in the belly of a giant fishy for 3 days and lived to tell about it. You must believe it. You must accept it by faith. Fucking unbelievable. So, any Christians out there, don't laugh at the followers of Zevi. Look how gullible they were, thinking he could fly. Obviously he was lying. Your book is full of shit. Just like that. Anyway, with help from his friends, Zevi was officially confirmed under incredibly phony pretenses as the Messiah in Constantinople in 1658. In that city, in that year, Zevi met a Jewish preacher, Abraham Yakini, a disciple of the Talmudic scholar Joseph Trani, I kid you not, Trani, fitting name. Joseph Trani, who confirmed his Messianic mission, as if he had credentials to confirm that. But, in Jewland, that's how it works, right? When you're considered a man of God and you give your approval to this Messianic claimant. It doesn't matter what he says. People, the followers, the gullible saps, are going to accept this horse shit. Yakini is said to have forged a manuscript in archaic characters which bore testimony to Zevi's claim to being the Messiah. Whatever, man. This is like the Vatican and its donation of Constantine document, right? A total forgery. But the masses fell for it, that Constantine, who everybody had looked up to as not only a great political leader, but a great religious one, right? They forged this document saying that Constantine bequeathed his authority as emperor to the Bishop of Rome, i.e. the Pope. And so for centuries, people accepted this donation of Constantine, donating his authority to the Pope, as legitimate, and that thus made the Pope's authority legitimate over not only the spiritual realm, but the secular realm as well, over the kings, right? That, to further buttress their claim that, according to the Torah, that the priestly line had authority over the kingly, the God's authority overrode that of man's. Anyways, this particular document was entitled The Great Wisdom of Solomon, and it opened with these words to legitimize the claim of Zevi as the Messiah. And so he had it arranged, had it written, another forged document, but people accepted it as divinely inspired by God. A lot of Jews, right? It opened with these words: I, Abraham, was confined in a cave for 40 years. Notice the magic number 40, right? Jesus was in the desert for 40 days, fasting and being tempted of the devil. The children of Israel wandered in the desert for 40 years. The flood raged on for 40 days, right? The Noah's flood, always 40, 40, 40, 40, pertaining to a trial that you would emerge victorious over, So they had to put that number in there, right? Look how, elite Jews guys have been hucksters even with their own people, right? Of course. They don't just deceive the Goyim masses. They originally began just deceiving Jews. That's how Judaism got off the ground in the first place. In fact, they never intended originally for their texts to be used to deceive the Goyim. That came with Paul. Paul was the first one to introduce this idea of using Jewish holy texts that previously had only been used to deceive Gentiles. There were some very rare exceptions here and there, but it was never intended to be used, to reach out to the masses of Gentiles. Paul was the first one to introduce that. It was always just for Jews. Anyways, so let me start this over. Notice they're making it out like Abraham wrote this. So, oh wow, this is an actual lost document from Abraham that he wrote. I, Abraham, was confined in a cave for 40 years, and I wondered greatly that the time of miracles did not arrive. Then was heard a voice proclaiming, a son will be born in the Hebrew year 586, the year 1626, to Mordecai Zevi. They actually put the fucking name in there. And he will be called Sabbatai. He will humble the great dragon. He, the true Messiah, will sit upon my throne. Cut the shit. And so the followers of Zevi were absolutely convinced now. This is an ancient prophecy. Abraham wrote it himself. Look, he said it right here. I, Abraham, and the rabbis have assured us that this is an authentic ancient document. That was good enough for them. Christians, guys, again, have fallen for this shit all through the centuries. All it had to do is come stamped with the papal approval, right? Catholics are still waiting for the Pope to officially declare the the visit of Mary in 1917 at Fatima, right? They're waiting for papal approval. As long as the Pope doesn't approve of a Marian apparition, well, it's either not true or we can't be sure that it's true. And so some Catholics might believe it. They're just thinking that the Pope is dragging his feet. Others think that, nope, if the Pope's not accepting it, I'm not going to accept it. Even though it might be true, I'm waiting for the Pope. It's fucking unbelievable. The power that they afford these fucking losers, just waiting for because in their thinking, when the Pope says it, it's from God. If the Pope doesn't say it, it's not from God. The whole idea of ex cathedra, right? The infallibility of the Pope. Once he declares something officially from Peter's chair, then it is true. So it's the same shit within the Christian world. And all Protestants, maybe not to that degree, but Protestants still believe it too. If their church leaders declare something, a lot of official publications in Protestant churches declare this. In Adventism, back in the 90s, they officially declared that even though we don't accept the doctrine of infallibility as taught in the Catholic Church, nevertheless, we must recognize that there is a divine authority within the Adventist Church that God has established. So they're claiming that we're not teaching infallibility like the Catholic Church. Don't accept that idea. That's heresy. And yet, when you're done reading the fucking thing, that's the very idea that they're instilling in you. That the leaders of the Adventist Church are, in fact, being led by God. Therefore, you need to respect their authority. There is a teaching authority. So they're telling you to follow what the leaders say. Follow the leader wherever he may go. It's the same shit, guys. You got it in Protestantism. You got it in Catholicism. And, of course, you got it in Judaism. They're just following suit. Because Jews created Christianity. And from behind the scenes have always controlled it. Protestantism and Catholicism alike. Anyway, so here was this, prophecy that they're attributing to Abraham, and yeah, the suckers fell for it. Anyway, oh Christ, we're almost at the hour mark here. Yeah, actually, I guess I will stop there because I'm about to enter another dimension of this discussion, and it's going to take us way past the hour. So yeah, I guess I'll stop there. Very interesting, though. We're going to get deeper into this little bastard and see how he has exerted a tremendous influence, and that influence has been to bring as many Jews as possible back to the original ideology of Judaism, which was to embrace evil, right? And in doing so, to think if you're into that righteousness thing, a lot of you Jews, okay, fine, but to attain righteousness, you gotta dive deep into sin. And what is this sin specifically? Sin against the Gentiles. That this is God's will. You will achieve righteousness by sinning against the Gentiles. The more Gentiles you fuck up, screw over, take advantage of, kill, whatever, the closer you're going to get to that ultimate state of righteousness. Whatever it takes, it doesn't matter in Jew think. Whatever it takes to get them on board with this ideology. If they can't come right out and tell them to be evil for the sake of evil, well, okay, we'll tell them to be evil for the sake of goodness, whatever. However, we can deceive them in that direction so that they will embrace what Judaism is really all about, indulging in evil. And so, rabbis will preach this theme, how the Gentiles were put here by God to be used by us so we can have world domination. This has always been Yahweh. And they'll quote from not just the Talmud and the Kabbalah, they'll quote from the Torah. And then they'll say, see, it's all the same message. And it is, right? And so this is how they brought many people aboard to accepting and participating in heinous acts against the Goyim, thinking, well, this is God's will. This is the path to holiness and righteousness. Anyway, guys, thanks for joining me. We'll catch you in part 2. We'll see you then. Take care.